everyone. Thank you for being here in ISTA for the third time. And today I'm going to speak about Selenium CDP CDP in Selenium 4. And let's get started. Well, CDP, first, what is CDP? CDP comes from Chrome DevTools protocol, also known as DevTools. It allows tools to instrument, inspect, debug, and profile Chromium browsers. And when I say Chromium browsers, I mean latest versions of Chrome and Edge browsers. Instrumentation is divided into a number of domains. Here you can see all the domains which are currently available for the Chrome Debugging Protocol. Chrome DevTools protocol. And each domain defines a number of commands and events that it can generate. Both of them, commands and events, are serialized JSON objects of a fixed structure. During the topic today, I'm going to use network domain, emulation domain, log domain, and a few others into the examples. But before start using CDP in our test, we first need to create an instance of DevTools. How this can be done? I'm going to split the solution into two different examples. When we run our tests locally on our local machines and when we execute our test against Selenium grid. Into the example with the local execution, usually so far we were creating a WebDriver instance using direct driver implementation like Chrome driver or Edge driver. If you're using that kind of way for running your tests, then in order to start using DevTools, you need to apply those two lines of code. First, we need to use HasDevTools interface to call its method getDevTools in order to create an instance of DevTools object. After that, this will not be enough, and we need to create a session. There are a couple of ways to create a session. The first one is create session if there isn't one. This means that it is checking whether we have an active DevTools session, and the other one is just create session. So far, so good. We know how to create a DevTools instance and a session in our test to start running CDP. But now let's see the example with Selenium grid execution. So far with Selenium 3, we were using remote WebDriver and providing Selenium grid URL and capabilities in order to run our tests. If you try and use the same two lines of code for DevTools, then you'll see your tests are going to fail. And the reason behind that is HasDevTools interface is implemented on Chromium browser, Chromium driver level, and our remote WebDriver instance doesn't know for its existence. In order to have our HasDevTools interface applicable when we run our tests against Chrome or Edge in a Selenium grid environment, we need to augment the driver. And what augmentation does is the following. It goes and checks in our capabilities. It sees what is the browser that we want to use, and it tries to get all interfaces which doesn't depend on anything and are available for that driver implementation. In our case, we have a look and HasDevTools interface is such interface. And this means that if we augment the driver, then the next two lines with HasDevTools interface and create session if there isn't one are going to work. Another thing which we have in Selenium 4 is remote WebDriver builder. The cool thing here is that first you can provide a list of capabilities. You can just mention them via one-off, and you'll be able to run your tests against one of the browsers which are matching of the capabilities. And the most impressive thing is that you have the ability to augment the driver when you create the instance. So it doesn't matter whether you're going to use the left implementation or the right implementation in Selenium 4, both lines after that are going to work. Cool. Now we know how to create DevTools instance and a session where we can execute our tests either in a local execution or Selenium grid execution. Now let's see some real examples how we can use CDP in general. First problem which I'm going to check is related to authentication. I'm working with Selenium for more than 8 years, and all my testing experience was related with authentication. We had a lot of issues there. For some browsers, it was working. For some, it wasn't working. And sometimes we had to authenticate in a couple of domains with different credentials. With Selenium 4, authentication problem has a really clean solution. And in order to achieve that, we need to use the network domain. This is an example how we can use network domain via DevTools and command. And we have a couple of domains which first, before start using them, we need to enable, and then to start using them. Network domain is one of those domains which first requires to be enabled. And after that, because I know that authorization header is the one which is responsible for solving the authentication problem, I'm going to use set extra HTTP headers command, where I'm going to provide authorization header. And this means that when my tests start running after that, every request which is executed in my browser session will automatically get authorization header inside of it. And this is going to work until you change the headers in your session or until you stop the test. The next example which I'm going to check is related to browser console logs. This is solution using a log domain, and again, as a network domain, we need to enable first the log domain. You can see how this is happening. After that, in this case, I'm using event, and that event is called entry added. So I'm subscribing for that entry added event. And what I'm doing is just I'm having a logs array list where I'm putting every entry which was added into the browser console logs. After that, when you run your test, you're going to have a quick access to the console logs. You can see what was out there, whether you have issues or not. And the cool thing here, at least from my perspective, is that you can use this in two different ways. First one is if you want to check that during your full browser session testing or full test, if you want to check whether you have some issues with browser console logs print like warning or error messages, you can run your test, and once it completes, you can analyze the array list and make the appropriate assertion. But in my experience, we had some cases where we were testing on development instances which are not really stable, not really cool, and there are tons of messages in our console logs like errors. So what we achieved is that now with Selenium 4, you can specify a location where you want only to profile the console logs. And what we do is we run our test until a certain point. Then we enable the log domain, we subscribe for the respective log entry added, and then we are performing the action in Selenium. Once the action completes and our validation from the UI perspective completes, then we also make another assertion about the log entry, and we validate whether we have some warnings or error posted. If we have, then we fail the test and put a lot deeper message with all the stack trace and information why the test has failed. Next example is similar to the log, but this time I'm going to check the network requests. Again, I need to enable in the network domain because it is part of it, the actions that I'm going to use. And this time I'm going to use request will be sent event and response received event. One thing that I want to highlight here is that if in your session you already enabled the network domain, you don't need to do it second time. You need to use it only when you create a new session in your DevTools object, or if you have closed the network domain previously in your test. So why this example is interesting is, again, something from my experience so far and basically my pains with analytics. In most cases, if you're building a site, you definitely need to have analytics integrated because this is your eyes and this is the way how you can see what people does on your site to gather some metrics and to improve your site and to increase your profit. So with analytics, we had a problem into the past, and first problem was that not on every action we were sending the analytics request, and the second one was that not every time analytics request was having a right order to be triggered or the right data to be sent. Now with Selenium 4, we can listen for all the requests, and then before certain action, we can wipe the object. After the respective action, we can analyze and see whether we have analytics request triggered, what was their request data which was sent, whether the information was totally accurate, and so on, which is going to unlock another potential to running our tests. In previous execution with Selenium 3, we had to use proxy implementation in order to achieve that. But now with Selenium 4, you don't need proxy anymore for that kind of testing. Next example is related with geolocation. And here I'm using browser domain and emulation domain. And Before start running tests with geolocation on your site, first you need to ensure that geolocation is enabled. This is example code how we enable geolocation in your browser, and after that this is an example how you can provide latitude, longitude, and accuracy, and to override your geolocation. If you want to validate what is going to happen on your site when you have some geolocation features, but the Chrome or the Edge browser doesn't have permissions to use your geolocation, then you can just change this to deny and run your test and you achieve it. Next example is related to network conditions, and this is again part of the network domain. In this case, I'm going to use emulate network conditions command. I can provide offline, offline, latency, download, upload speed, and what kind of connection type object we want to simulate. Cool thing here is that network conditions can be changed during your test session whenever you want. Previously, you could achieve this if you are using some paid services of external grid providers and with some other magic. But now this comes out of the box with Selenium 4 using CDP. And a couple of examples. In my previous project, we had to validate a couple of actions, how they behave when we simulate open some elements, and how they are going to work on different mobile devices with different network speed and so on. In order to save time, we basically didn't have any opportunity to save time, and we were running all the tests in let's say 3G or 2G network speed. But now with Selenium 4, what you can achieve is you can reach to a certain point of your test on a maximum speed. Then using emulate network conditions, you can change the network traffic, execute your step, and then validate what is the behavior. So this way you can validate whether certain pages load under 2G for less than 30 seconds, under 3G for less than 30 seconds, and so on, based on your performance requirements of your application. And using CDP, such kind of tests are even possible now. And the good thing is that you can reduce your total execution time by switching where exactly you want to put those network conditions. The last example with pure CDP is related with blocking requests. It is again part of the network domain, and in this case, I'm going to use set blocked URLs command. It accepts one argument, which is a list with different string patterns, and basically, if certain request has is matching one of the patterns, then the request is not executed and it stays in a pending state forever. Again, using that blocked request pattern, you can use it whenever you want in your test. And if at certain point you want to wipe all the patterns, the only thing that you need to do is just send to that command an empty array list. And then all the blocking rules which you have applied will be wiped. So this is another cool mechanic which you can use as part of your test to validate some different scenarios, what is happening if some of the requests becomes stale or something else is happening. Cool. Now we know how to use CDP, but let's speak a little bit about its limitations. The first thing is that currently I'm using Maven as dependency management tool, and I'm using Selenium 4.0.0 as a driver. As you can see, we have a couple of DevTools protocols which are already added into the driver. It's 93, 94, and 95. And now, first question is what is going to happen if I start using Chrome 96? Luckily, I have the answer for you because Chrome 96 was just released on my machine today, and I was able to validate that. And Selenium is smart. Yes, it's smart, and it's trying to search for version 96 because every time a new browser comes, it comes with its own version of CDP. It might be backward compatible, but it might not be. In this case, Selenium is looking whether it has respective implementation built inside of it, and if there is, it is going to use it. But if there isn't, it is going to look for the nearest match. In this case, it will be DevTools API for version 95, and it is going to use it instead of 96. If we have changes, deprecated functionality or changes on the API in 96, our tests are going to fail. But if we don't have, the tests are going to succeed because basically we don't have any major changes between DevTools 95 and DevTools 96. So in case with Chrome 96 against Selenium 4.0.0, everything is working out of the box, at least for the examples I have provided to you. Another potential limitation is that when you write your test, you need to decide which version of CDP is going to use. The good thing is, again, because of that smart mapping in Selenium, even if you wrote in your code to use explicitly version 19.4, if there is a better version which is matching the requirements, it is going to automatically switch to it and use it, although you have specified version 94. Of course, if there is changes which are not backward compatible between version 94, 95, or 96, your test is going to fail and you will need to update the mapping. So in order to save a little bit of time and coding effort, Selenium built some features on top of CDP. And the good thing for them is that if we decide to use them, we don't need to create a DevTools instance. We don't need to create a DevTools session because Selenium does that out of the box for you. The first example is HasAuthentication interface. As you probably know, it's again problem with authentication, and Selenium created a nice wrapper called registered method where you can provide different domains and at the same time for every domain username and password. What it's going to do at the background, it is going to create a session in your DevTools. It is going to use set extra HTTP headers, and it's going to provide authorization header based on the data that you provided. But instead of writing all those lines of code which you saw into the previous slides, we can use just this method. I have to say that that implementation is working 100% when you're running your tests locally. But when you start running your tests in Selenium Grid environment, things becomes a little bit complex. You can open that GitHub issue. After that, you can see there are a couple of examples which are showing how to solve that problem when you're running your tests against Selenium Grid. And the main key thing here is that respective interfaces depends on has DevTools. So in order to add this out of the box in our remote WebDriver session, we need to add the respective implementation via augmentation as well. Next example is how we can modify network speak during our test. And for this purpose, we have HasNetwork Conditions interface. First, we need to create an object from Chromium Network Conditions. We can provide the same type of information, whether to be offline, what to be latency, download and upload speed. Then we can use HasNetwork Conditions interface, provide the respective object, and after that, our test is going to run against that speed. And the same thing which I said already on the previous slides applies here. You can modify your network conditions whenever you want in your tests. It's not required to be in the beginning of the test. It could be somewhere in the middle. Next example is related to filter interface and network interceptor object. And if you have used previously with Selenium 3 proxies in order to collect information while your tests are running, or if you have wanted to modify your responses from certain API calls, you had to use a proxy. And that proxy had to be coding proxy, like in Java example, either browser mob proxy or browser up. Now with Selenium 4, you don't need the proxy for such kind of cases. Using a filter interface and network interceptor, you can achieve this. And this is an example how I'm simulating a blocking network requests in my browser. I'm just providing a list of some blocked URLs strings. If the respective API call or HTTP call is matched in some of the patterns, then I do not send the request. Other than that, I'm sending the request. And in order to use that filter object in my code, I need to wrap it with the network interceptor, and this needs to happen in a try-catch block. All the logic that you put here into the respective try block, it is going to use your filter functionality and it is going to do what you have coded there. So instead of using proxy, now you can use filter object and you can achieve what you want to do. Keep in mind that if you go outside of the try block, then your filter interface will not be applicable and it will be like straightforward execution without any additional changes. Next example is using a root abstract class and network interceptor. And this is another way how you can modify the response of your application. For example, I'm checking here for certain API for certain string in a substring in my API calls. And if there is a match, then I'm changing the respective response. I'm adding certain headers. I'm adding a new body and a new status code. And all that logic will be put, I need to put it again into Networkinterceptor, try catch block, and all the logic which is inside of it is going to look for such kind of URLs. And if there is a match, it is going to send a new response instead of the one which my backend server returns, which is really cool because this gives us another way to test with different mock services, and then we can validate different UI scenarios based on our needs. I'm coming almost to the end of my presentation, but I want to say a few words about different external grids and how ready they are with Selenium 4. Basically, all of them, if you use all of those three services, you'll be able to run your test with Selenium 4. Unfortunately, you won't be able to use any of the CDP features. I had a call yesterday with Lambda Test, and they said that they're planning to be ready with that implementation in early January 2022. For browser stack and soul swaps, I know that they are closer to release that functionality and to start using it soon. So let's hope that in December, we're going to have some good news. This is another slide where you can see some of the references and code examples which I have used in my presentation. I really encourage everyone who is using Selenium to go through documentation about Selenium 4, to read the different documentation examples, blog posts, and definitely to open soul swaps and their knowledge sharing articles, because there are a lot of examples how you can boost your knowledge with Selenium 4 and start using it out of the box. And having said that, thank you. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Thank you, Nikki. It sounds like Selenium 4 is something which we would like to have, but the question is how painful it is to move from Selenium 3 to Selenium 4?
Well, I can speak from Java perspective because this is the programming language that I'm using, and I can share real examples with it. Basically, if you want to go, of course, it depends how you use Selenium 3. If you're using proxy, and if you decide to go with Selenium 4 immediately, all your tests using proxy might not work, and you need to duplicate them. That's why I would recommend to wait for a couple of weeks or months, or if you have the chance, just postpone those tests and re-enable it after a month or two, once most of the providers are ready with CDP. But if you don't have such kind of tests and you are using the rest of the functionality in Selenium 3, the only changes from the Java perspective is just changing some of the weights. Instead of providing a time weight, you need to use duration class and a couple of more code examples. The biggest change which I had to apply in our code was about how we were providing the dependencies for our external grid provider in order to run our tests with Selenium 4. So we achieved that for less than a day. Okay. That's why I think it's kind of easy, but again, it depends how complex is your code and how it's written.
Sounds really easy. Thanks a lot. I don't see any other questions, but if you have, you can send them yet in the chat. Nikki most probably will answer your questions. Thanks a lot for being here with us, and wish you all the best.
Thank you. Bye.